Hi, welcome to Dear Art Producer. I am your host, Heather Elder. Today is September 23rd, 2020, and I have invited Steve Ross, the head of production at Allstate, to be my guest today. Steve worked at McGarryBowen in Chicago for years, but recognized that the industry is changing and moved to Allstate, where he is helping to set up their in-house agency. Regardless of whether he's on the agency or the brand side, the heart of the job remains the same for him: the pursuit of the story, the collaboration with inspired artists, and the solving of unique problems each and every time. Welcome, Steve. How are you today?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
I'm great,
Good.
considering, all things considering.
Yes.
When I read that line, which I stole from you, and I'm sure you wrote on your LinkedIn, the idea of, where the heart of the job remains for you, the pursuit of the story, the collaboration with the artists, and solving of unique problems. I mean, I thought to myself, you've really encapsulated exactly what we all do, literally the heart of what we do. And I just thought that was such a fabulous line.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, well, production is a broad term, and producer is, there's so many different uses of that term and ways in which one calls themselves a producer and what they produce and where they produce. But at its core, I think we're all producers, whether it's production company side or agency side or client or post or whatever, all kind of share those common kind of goals or interests in the telling of a story and collaborating, and at least those are the things for me that seem to tie it all together. So that was hopefully meant to resonate with other producers out there.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. And it's interesting that you say that and are defining producer that way, because when I started the Dear Art Producer podcast, the idea was to literally interview, art buyers, the people in the role at the ad agencies. And then as, the world started to change and the interviews started happening, of course, I started realizing it's such a broad term. We're all art producers. I'm helping produce, creative directors are helping produce, client company, everyone is doing it. So it's been really kind of exciting to expand who we're interviewing for that very
Yeah.
reason.
Well, I'm glad you are. I kind of felt a little bit like voyeuristic listening into your podcast, and I don't come from the art buyer side, and as head of production, I end up overseeing the print production and working with art buyers, but it's not the world in which I grew up in, and so I'm learning about it as I go, and that's why I actually really enjoyed discovering your podcast and listening to some people who have wealth of experience in that area that I don't. But I felt a bit like an imposter coming on here, so
Oh, not at
I'm glad
all.
you opened
Not
it up.
at all. It's something I really value, this idea of transparency and communication and education. And, we all are in these positions and they very much are a vacuum. We kind of invented along the way. And if we didn't have each other to draw from and learn from, it would just make it that much harder. So thank you for agreeing to be on today.
My pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about your background. You just mentioned that you weren't always on the brand side. Just quickly tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm from Southern California originally, and I did not plan on going into advertising. I thought I was going to be in the music industry. I really wanted to work at a record company. That's kind of a big passion and interest of mine. And when I figured out that really wasn't the lifestyle that I could sustain, I was trying to figure out what to do and really fell into advertising, fell into an agency, not knowing necessarily what the departments even were. I got in an entry level position, knowing that commercials, I was a big fan of television and certainly influenced and affected by commercials, and I thought it would be an interesting area to get into, not really knowing where I would fit. But once I got into an agency, I thought I might be a writer, but production really spoke to me right out of the gate. As soon as I got there and saw that there were people who kind of bring together the pieces and they get to be involved in the filming and in the music selection, which was a big interest of mine, and just kind of bringing the pieces together and working with a lot of different teams was something that appealed to me. So I kind of forced my way into the production department at the agency they had gotten into in Los Angeles, worked there for a while, and then got an opportunity to move to Chicago from the woman I worked for in LA. She had moved back to Chicago where she was originally from, and she offered me position if they had won. They were pitching a piece of business, pitching Bob Evans Restaurants and Foods, and if they were to, if they, which I had never even heard of. I had heard of the producer Robert Evans in L.A., but I did, being in California, I had never heard of that food chain. So she said if they win that business, they'll be staffing up, and she offered me a position. And they did win, and I moved myself from California to Chicago and started up at this agency, very small independent shop called Iyer Partners at the time, went on to become Chicago Creative Partnership. And I just grew there. I stayed there for quite a long time. It was 17 years at that place, and the agency grew and grew, and I ended up growing with it and becoming head of production, which, was a bigger title than the job really was. It was still a small agency, so I was head of a very small team, but it was a great experience and one of those entrepreneurial things that I discovered that I liked, and so
It's
that's
so
how I
funny.
kind of got into it.
I love hearing everybody's stories because no one really ever sets out to be who they are today. When I
Right.
interview them, nobody raised their hand at school and said, I want to be an art producer. I want to be head of production. I want to, maybe people said, I want to be in advertising, right? Or I want to be a
Right.
director, photographer. But it's so interesting to how we fall into this role. And I think it often comes with the experience that we're surrounded by in a creative environment, being organized people with those production brains. It's an obvious step for everyone to kind of go in that direction. But until you're surrounded by it, you don't really know that it exists or how it would even work.
Right. Yeah. I did not know it existed. I didn't take marketing classes in college. That wasn't an area of focus. And so it was only when I kind of stumbled into this agency and saw, how they broke it out and what that group did, it became very clear that was where I fit in best. As someone, like you said, who's somewhat organized and likes to kind of have their hand on the whole thing, and being in charge of the budget and the timing and all of that made sense to me, and that came relatively easy. But the other side is just this creative side that I was probably a little, I don't know, maybe intimidated or too scared to pursue in some way, and I wasn't ready to throw myself out there as a writer, or
Yeah.
being able to contribute creatively and have a creative point of view and bring that as a producer, especially once you've kind of earned that place amongst the creatives and they respect your creative point of view, was really satisfying.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome to hear. Okay, so obviously, from your history, you used to be on the agency side, and now you're on the brand side. Allstate is very fortunate to have you. And were brought in to help create an in house agency. And I know for so many people who are listening, both other producers and other photographers, that's a probably very fascinating idea because they're hard to get access to from where we sit just because they're so new, and finding out who works there and who all the players are and what the titles are different. So I think if you can help pull back the curtain a little bit about what you're up to there, I think that would be really interesting and fascinating for a lot of people, and maybe we can start with just hearing how it's going.
Well, it would be going better if there wasn't a global pandemic going on. Uh, I started March 2nd, so I started
Oh my God.
basically a week and a half before the world broke and everything got shut down. And so it's been a challenge to try to build something brand new, from afar, from home, and to there's a lot of challenges there. There's just trying to understand, like you said, I spent my whole career on the agency side. So to go over to a client and to be within the brand is new unto itself. And even if I was going into the office every day, it would take me weeks, if not months, to figure out how this place works. It's a massive enterprise, and it's not an ad agency. They're not in the business of advertising. They're in the business of insurance. So That has taken a while to kind of wrap my head around and to figure out just that the ways that I'm used to get things getting done no longer really apply. So doing that from home is even tougher, much less just getting to build a rapport and get to know the other people who have been hired recently. I mean, there are some people who were hired just before me. There are a lot of people who have been hired since, and we haven't been able to, be in the same room together. So it's that part has been a challenge. It certainly would have been a challenge either way, but that this adds, a wrinkle that I never imagined when I took the job. But having said all that, it's going pretty well. We're still getting the work done. We're getting the work out the door, and we're building it on the fly. It's something that we have to kind of do parallel pathing. We have to focus on setting up new processes and getting all the forms and protocol in place at the same time that we're getting work out. So it's definitely a challenge. We're leaning on our external partner a lot in this first year. We've partnered with Droga as an external agency, and we're tapping into they're up and running. They're a great agency, ready to go. So leaning into their expertise at times, but we are doing a ton of the work in-house as well. And we're just doing it the best we can. It's one of those things that we all say, we can't wait for a year from now to reflect on this time and say, gosh, do you remember when we, only had 3 of us here and we could barely get something out the door, and now we have this robust department. That's what we're all looking forward to. But we're still in that time where we're just learning to crawl.
And what does the structure look like? Do you have producers that you work with and then internal clients, or maybe you can kind of shed a little bit of light on that?
Yeah. So within Allstate, David Hernandez was hired as the chief creative officer to build the creative capabilities, and he's hired writers and art directors just like you would have at an ad agency. He's got teams at various levels, and we have quite a few. So we're building a pretty good group of creative talent. And then he hired me as head of production, and I'm hiring or will be hiring producers across all mediums, integrated producers primarily, but we'll have run the range of all the work that we do. I don't have staff producers just yet. We've been leaning on freelance. Part of that is, like I said, right when I got there, everything in the world changed, and so it was hard to really gauge what the workflow is, what in a normal time, what the demands are. So kind of trying to take 6 months or so and figure out what we really need as I kind of design the department. But I will be hiring full-time producers. I have a full-time head of business affairs, so we have our own business affairs capabilities in-house. We have a huge studio in the Northbrook campus where we have editors and audio engineers and stages, and most of those roles have been filled with freelance, but we are going to be looking to hire full-time people in those roles as well. So building the in-house studio capabilities, as well as just the in-house agency. So in many ways, it emulates an agency itself. The idea is that maybe we try to learn from our agency experience and do things a little differently here and there, and maybe consolidate some roles or figure out, kind of a little bit more of an efficient way to do it, just a little more streamlined. As far as our client partners go, the people that when I was on the agency side, I always called, the quote unquote client. Those are my marketing partners now who I talk to daily. We have much more of an open dialogue with them than I ever had when I was at the agency. So that's a big difference, and that was something I was really attracted to, the kind of breaking down some of those barriers between agency and client and being able to work more in tandem with them and have more of an open dialogue running relationship. So I just think
Now,
that
I'm curious, these internal marketing partners that you are working closely with, when they come to you with a project, I'm assuming it initiates in their group. Mm-hmm. Who then at that point helps choose who gets hired? The photographer, the director. Is that the creative directors or the art directors that are working with him or her? Or is it the marketing partners? Is it you?
In terms of the director or the photographer who's going to,
because I think so many people are used to the creative agency model, right?
Yeah, It would be similar. It'll be production working in tandem with the creative team. So we just did a production and, we got the brief, the creative sold the work internally, got it approved. And I started a, big director search, sent it out to all the reps that have relationships with and everyone in town, and got, the usual submissions of reels and links. It really, I guess, and I can try to demystify it. It's my hope is that for people on the outside, they won't view our little internal agency very differently than they viewed me at McGarryBowen, where the process is very much the same. I want to try to make it very much the same, where there's constant dialogue between myself and my producers with the outside world, with the reps, with the production company folks. And whenever we have a project, those are the people we're going to reach out to and get submissions. And then it'll be the same process of sharing them with the creatives, whittling it down to a triple bid typically, and going from there. So that's kind of the similar process to what always existed within the agency.
That's great. That's great to hear. Okay, so when you mentioned that when you first started, it was March 2nd, right, when everything started to go sideways. What happened, at first during when you were first in lockdown with COVID, from a production point of view? Were you guys in the middle of any productions? Did you have to halt any, or were you just producing right through the whole thing? How did that look for you guys?
We had a couple start and stop kind of thing, false starts right at that time. I think we weren't. It was fortunate timing for Allstate in that they had just finished a package of spots with Dennis Haysbert that are on the air now, the burger joint, and there were about 4 or 5 spots that they had just finished, so were fresh, new work that they could put into the market, and that could tide us over. And the plan was for that to hold us over during this period of time. Once COVID hit, everyone started trying to react and quickly tried to figure out, how do we respond to this? What kind of message are we going to put out? And, we all saw a ton of those commercials from everyone using stock imagery and the classic voice, the stuff that got parodied online, and it became kind of ubiquitous. But we did some false starts there. We started some stuff that we decided ultimately it wasn't anything new. We weren't adding to the conversation, so we ended up going real down and dirty and just filmed our president talking to camera in his home about the giving back money. Allstate, going to give money back to the policyholders, and that was my first production at Allstate, and it was done for about $1.50, and it was. I was afraid that people were going to think, "Wow, this is the guy we hired. This is his level of production value that he brings." It was a strange way to start, but given the times, that was what we did. First thing out the door was a homemade, video that he
And I
basically
think it
shot.
probably looked like everybody else's at the time.
Yeah,
There's a
exactly.
lot of there was a lot of that going on.
And then we did a variety of other things that ultimately some of them have made their way out the door and some of them haven't. But I think it was one of those strange times where every day things were changing in the world, not just COVID, but all the other civil unrest and things going on in the world that was affecting the way you might want to put a message out there. And so we were very careful not to. I think the feeling was better to stay quiet instead of say something and do something wrong in this very sensitive time. So we held off on some work, but now we're up and running and producing a lot.
I was just going to ask that. So, what sort of projects are you actually out there on? Are people on set producing things, or is it still kind of maybe user generated content? Or
We've been doing more remote. It hasn't been user generated so much, and we're not on set. We shot the first big production that we shot in COVID times was something that we shot in Israel, and we did it all remotely. And it just so happened to be in Israel. That just happened to be where the directors that we gravitated towards, that happened to be where they live. So nobody could travel anyway. It didn't matter if we were shooting in Los Angeles, we still weren't going to physically attend the shoot. So once you embrace that limitation, it basically opens up the world. You're not going to be there no matter what. So
Right.
unless we shot in Chicago, we wouldn't attend. And even if we did shoot in Chicago, given the limits of the number of people that can be on set, I'm not sure how we would have really attended. So
Yeah, we've had a few shoots local to the photographers and directors we work with, and the clients still have not gone on set. I mean, some
yeah,
have, but they're still choosing not to.
yeah, and I get it. And it was there are definite trade-offs, and it went quite smoothly, and we got everything we needed, and it was a successful shoot. I mean, it ended up being, a night shoot for us here in Chicago. They started at 8 in the morning in Israel, so it was starting at midnight here. So we were
Wow.
all, in our homes from midnight till about 10 a.m. staring at our screens, following along. And that's a strange bonding experience as well. But the technology was fabulous. We got everything we wanted. We were able to communicate in real time and give our notes as the shoot was going on. It just is not the same. There's so many things.
What's missing? I mean, I know you're probably going to answer, but I'm curious to hear what you're going to say.
Yeah, aside from the obvious kind of ability to just be spontaneous and be in a room together and build off of each other's ideas, or if one person raises a concern or a question, to be able to kind of collaboratively come to a solution, that's missing. But aside from that, being on set, there's so many things that you can preemptively address. There's so many things that you notice while they're setting up the shot, and you go walk over to craft service to grab yet another donut. You walk by wardrobe and you might see, oh, this is the shirt. Seeing it here, I don't like it as much as I did, and I know the client's not going to like it, and so I want to pull the producer aside and make a comment and try to nip this in the bud before we get it in front of camera, before we're all ready to roll and camera set up and lighting is set up and everybody is on their mark, ready to go. These are the kind of things that you can see in passing, where when you're at home, you can only see what the production is serving up to you at any given time. And typically it's really only what the camera is going to see, what you're shooting. So all that stuff that's outside of that lens is just not available for comment, which means pre-production is so much more important. But nevertheless, there's always little things that come up on the day of the shoot that when you see it on location, when you see it in context, you might want to tweak or adjust, and you just can't do that. Or if you do it, you're throwing the shoot back a certain amount of time. You're kind of halting everything right as they're about ready to pull the trigger and shoot, and
Which you
that's
really don't have time to do on set.
exactly,
And
yeah,
we're learning that too, and I just keep calling it a dance, but you really, really have to choreograph that dance in pre-production. And it's a very different type of pre-production than we're all used to having. And, all these decisions need to be made way in advance, especially wardrobe and propping, so that having those conversations and stopping production to make changes take way longer and really kind of throws everything off.
yeah, exactly right. I mean, production in and of itself, the day of takes longer because there's more sanitization going on. There's cleaning of props. There's things that we never had to worry about that are taking more time in between shots. And so your day, even if you have your same 12-hour day or whatever it might be, there's less time where you're actually getting to shoot. There's just more of that other new time needed. So all those decisions in prep are really critical to get right. And when you have to build in that time in pre-production to be able to make sure that you've got all the options kind of vetted out and talked through, and everyone's on the same page. So it really does change the way you build your calendar a little bit, and the schedule. You try to throw in a little more time in pre-production, and frankly, we've also had to throw in a little more time in post-production because we're no longer sitting in a room with an editor knocking out some stuff that normally would just take a matter of a few hours. Instead, it's postings and links and postings and back and forth, and somebody eventually gets to look at it and makes one comment, and then it takes a little while to repost, and you end up losing a day or two when in the previous world we would have knocked it out in over lunch. So
Yeah.
Those are big changes.
Back up for just a second. Talk to me a little bit about your marketing partners and their expectation in terms of building in more time on the calendar, being less efficient on set, which means having less scenarios or shots, smaller shot lists. Did that take some education, or was it pretty obvious for them that that was the new reality?
I think they were all very receptive to it. They heard it. They were listening and they were nodding and they understood, certainly in theory. I think it takes going through it once to experience it to really know that, oh, production was serious about that. It's like, it's one of those warnings that you hear and you say, oh yeah, of course it'll take long. Sure. I hear you. We're not going to get as much. Sure thing. But until you are there and experience it, maybe you don't really realize what that actually translates to. So, I mean, nobody is blind to what's going on in the world and how COVID has affected all of our lives in so many ways. And so when you're talking pre-production and you're talking how it's going to affect the production, everybody is sensitive to it and was very open-minded and accepting of that news. At least my marketing partners have been. I can't speak for all other clients, but these guys at Allstate were very good about it. But I still think until we went through it and they saw maybe how limited their feedback could be or how limited some of the options could be, it didn't really get driven home until they experienced it.
And tell me a little bit about anything you've learned, right? For the listeners out there, is there anything that you feel like you didn't know what you didn't know until you got on set and it was like, oh my God, absolutely. Next time we have to really pay attention to that. I hadn't even considered that.
I think we're learning the process when you're doing it remotely, the communication process and the way that we structure who goes into what breakout room and how the communication flow is going to go. That's a learning process. And I'm not sure that we, cracked the nut the first time. And I think we'll get better as we go. I think everyone is trying to figure it out all at the same time. The production company is trying to protect their director and make sure that they're not having to spend too much time in Zoom rooms talking to multiple entities. But there has to be some way that the quote unquote client, which is now me, the marketing team and the folks from the client, do have some direct line of communication to the agency creatives if it's an external partner for us, or the client or the director directly. And so I think there's still a bit of a dance going on there about how, normally it's Video Village and everyone sits in Video Village together and you put them a safe distance away so they don't have to be, they're not really underfoot, but they're still there and they're still able to lob their comments in and be heard. And I think we need to figure out, and we're still figuring out how to make that happen for everybody without it being too obtrusive.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about marketing. Do you handle viewing of work in the same way that you did when you were at an agency? I mean, I know obviously we can't come in and present new work to you, but are you just as interested in kind of seeing who's out there and what's happening and what kind of marketing are you getting? Are people sending you emails, just share a little bit with us about how you stay in touch with your artists.
Yeah, I am still very interested in knowing who's doing what and who's moved to what company and who's, what new work is out there. I still, read all the trades daily and try to follow it that way. I have made sure that all of my contacts, my rep friends and producers at the various production companies know my new email address and my new number, and they've basically just added me to the same list that I was on when I was at McGarry. So I continue to stay in the loop, and I get the emails and the updates and the new spot alerts and the new signings and anything like that. I get them frequently, and I love that. I still look at those, and I'll click on them when I have the time, and I put them into my folders and save them as needed. And reference them when the opportunities arise. So I still do. I was very, very open to always meeting someone for a cup of coffee. When we were back in the office at McGarry, I'm addicted to coffee. So I always have my afternoon fix, and that was a perfect time to meet with someone at about 3 o'clock to grab a half-hour coffee date. And so now I still do that a lot on the
A long
phone.
time ago, doesn't it?
Oh my gosh, doesn't it? Yeah.
Oh,
Uh, I miss it. I mean, I still have my coffee because, an addiction's an addiction, but now I just I either have it alone or I have it, or I'll set up, a phone call at that time, and that. So I still try to stay connected. I really miss the people. This it's part of
yeah.
what I love about our industry is how social it is and how fun it is. And I grew up with these people. I came to Chicago, I don't know, 25 years ago, and so I've known a lot of these people for a long time, and I miss being able to go to lunch, to have them come in for a screening, to grab a cup of coffee, whatever. So I try to do that as best we can.
Yeah, gosh, I was talking with a photographer over the weekend that we represent that was shooting, and they were going to do it outdoors, but then it got moved into his studio, and he has a huge studio, big, tall ceilings, and they did a dinner at an enormously long table, very socially distanced. They had all been tested anyway. And they FaceTimed me. I was like, oh my God, you have to FaceTime me like this. I'm so sad. I'm missing this. And every person who got on the FaceTime was just saying how happy and appreciative they were for that moment, because they really missed that idea of sitting around the table and talking and laughing and wrapping a shoot. It's missing.
It's so very much missing, and it is. I mean, you stay up all night. My other shoots, the shoots that we did for the launch campaign that we did with Droga, I was on those shoots as well, and those ended up being night shoots. Many of them, not all of them, but we shot in Norway, and so that was the same kind of time difference thing. And then and then we also shot in LA, but they were night shoots. So you stay up all night, literally. We started at 2 or 3 in the morning on one of the shoots and went till 3 in the afternoon. So it's ungodly hours, and you're up with people. And I've been on those experiences in the real world, pre-COVID world, where you get punchy and you get silly, and you end up really bonding with people because you're in this very unique experience together. And it's just not the same to go through that. Productions bond people together. You're in the fire hole together, and you end up really getting to see people outside of the office setting, and you get to develop real relationships. And I think that is one of those little secret sauce things that's missing from not being there in person. And I
Great.
definitely miss it.
I would also add to that the idea of not being in an office together,
Hmm.
right? Like I drive around San Francisco and I think, gosh, what is going to happen? Look at all these office buildings. What is going to happen to them? And then, my husband and I talk. He has an ad agency, and we talk. He's like, it's not going away, Heather. He's like, while we all can appreciate now the ability to work remotely, and that will continue, clients won't want to spend the money for people to travel. We're recognizing you don't have to. There's, accountability even when you're working remotely. But people want to be collaborative, and they want to, first of all, they also want to leave their house.
Yeah.
Um, but they also want to, there's so much more that happens in person with that quick drop by your office or see you at the elevator or whatever it is that just doesn't exist right now. And there'll be such a level of appreciation for it, I think, when it does finally come back.
Yeah, I agree completely. I do think that there'll be some different version of us going back. It won't be 5 days a week, 9 to 5 again, but as if anyone worked only 9 to 5. I say that it's, uh, but but
Not working 9 to 5.
but I mean, what I really I miss, it's the time coming in before the meeting or after the meeting. It's the little bit, those little exchange glances as you're getting up to leave the meeting, and you look across and you see somebody in the other department, and you both roll your eyes because you both are basically on the same page. Like, oh, I don't know what that meeting was all about,
Mhm.
or one of the where, and then you realize, okay, this person is somebody that I share, a point of view with, and I'm going to follow up and try to go a little deeper here. Or it's as you're walking in, the little sidebar comments that help to create for a good meeting. Make sure that you're on the same page, or a little whatever it is. It's all that little stuff that is, now we all come into a Zoom call at the exact same time, and everyone puts themselves on mute, and most people don't turn the camera on, and one person speaks and everybody else is on mute. And if you try to make a joke, it's crickets, nobody can hear it. It's so awkward. So it's just, there's a lot being missed there. And I guess, we're all getting better at it. And I've noticed at Allstate more and more meetings lately, people are turning the camera on. So people maybe are starting to feel that disconnection a little more and wanting to connect, which is great. I think it's a good thing. And I'm sure some places, like I said, we're brand new. So all of the people I work with, we don't know each other at all. So everyone's a little shy and everyone's a little timid to turn their camera on. Whereas if it was at McGarry and I was with these people I've been with for 10 years, I would have, everyone would have the camera on and nobody would care what they look like, but it's all a work in progress.
It is. Oh God. Well, I, like to pat ourselves on the back because I say this all the time, but we've been pioneers here. We're finding a new way to produce. And I think we've done a really good job. This has only been since, the middle of March. And we've come a long way as an industry in terms of what we can get done and how we can communicate and how we can succeed. So even though there's all of our favorite things don't really exist anymore, I think we're doing a really fabulous job of making do for sure.
I think that's a great point. And the truth is, if any industry could weather this, it's production, because what we do is solve problems. What we do is, deal with obstacles and figure out solutions. And this was a big one, but I really have been so impressed at the production community, the way that they got their act together and came out with these guidelines and figured out, what was going to be needed in order to get people back to work and safely and to keep things moving. And it was incredibly quick when you think about it, how quickly we were able to, do these remote shoots and the solutions that were being thrown up, and directors shooting at home with their own families and, those kind of things is just shows the resourcefulness and the thinking that our community possesses. And it is a real pat on the back to us.
Our entire careers have prepared us for this.
That's true. That's right. This is the worst weather day we've ever had.
We have no excuse.
Right.
We're almost done here, and I always ask 2 questions. The first one is, what is your favorite thing to do on a Sunday?
My favorite thing to do on a Sunday would be, well, now it's football season, so that takes the top. But I'd love to get up and get a little bit of movement in, so a bike ride or a walk before I can then sit on my couch and feel good about watching football for the next 3 to 6 hours. And then to top it off, just to order in dinner and not be cooking or worrying about what's in the pantry. But that would be a favorite Sunday.
That's nice. One of my favorite answers to that most recently was, "What's a Sunday?" And I thought, oh my God, it's true. It's so true. And then just my most favorite personal question is, if you weren't a producer, what would you be doing?
I think, realistically, keeping my limited skill set in mind, I think I would, because otherwise I'd say, touring with Bruce Springsteen or playing shortstop for the Angels or something. But I would love to own a record store, and the kind of record store that I grew up going to, like a Rhino Records or Amoeba Records in Los Angeles, where that was more of a cultural thing. They served bagels on Saturday, and they had live shows, and it was a gathering center, and there was just this amazing curation of incredible music with knowledgeable people, without attitude. And I spent my youth at those places just flipping through records, and I'm thrilled to see the vinyl still exists and people still care about it. And it may be a smaller subset of collectors who are still buying vinyl, but at least it's enough to keep it going. And I would love to have a little record store that I can spend my time in.
Well, hopefully someday I'll pop on LinkedIn and it'll say, "Congratulate Steve Ross. He's now the owner of it."
That would be great. Everything, you pop on by and buy yourself a little vinyl. I'll have some recommendations.
Coffee at 3:00.
Perfect.
Well, Steve, this has been really wonderful. You really have helped pull back the curtain on what happens at an in-house agency and what you're trying to build. And I can't wait to check back with you in a couple of months and see how much you've grown. And I think they're really fortunate to have you at Allstate. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks so much. It was really an honor, and I've really enjoyed listening to your podcast. So thanks so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. All right. Well, take care. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.